I keep that letter not because I hold on to the anger, because I have no anger anymore towards my birth mother, but because it's a chapter. It's a chapter in the story and it's
Right.
real. I no longer run from the chapters that were painful. I embrace it all because that's how I've created this person who I am now, which is the real me.
Who am I?
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 This is Who Am I, Really? A podcast about adoptees that have located and connected with their biological family members.
I'm Damon Davis, and you're about to meet Dr. Amy Geller from Wykoff, New Jersey. Amy had an idyllic adopted life as the youngest child and the only girl in her family. But an accidental discovery put her in front of her adoptive parents, facing an uncomfortable situation and feelings she chose to bury. As a young adult, Amy was found, angered by the intrusion, but she paused to gather herself in order to enter reunion with caution. Today, Amy is a therapist and adoption researcher with an exciting new online resource called adultadoptees.com. That's adult-adoptees.com. This is Amy's journey. Amy grew up in Rockland County, New York, a suburb of the big city, living on a lake in a big family where she was the youngest of 5 siblings. Her 4 brothers are biologically related to their parents, and Amy is the sole adoptee, a girl among the boys who completed their family. She said she always knew she was adopted. It was not a secret, but they also did not talk about her adoption. It was just a fact of life. But as the youngest sibling and the only girl, Amy said she was always trying to find her way in with the group of boys.
I did become curious when I was around 14 because I stumbled upon my adoption papers. So
Wow.
my childhood would be considered idyllic. Like we grew up on a lake and this big family, which was not really the norm at the time. I grew up in the 70s and 80s when it was 2 siblings, 2 years apart. And so my family was a one-off, being one of 5 kids. My brothers, when I came home, were 12, 10, 9, and 4. So we had a spread. And growing up, we were comfortable and we were considered a really close family. Although I think as the youngest sibling and the only girl, I always felt like I wanted to be included in the mix. So I was always trying to kind of get my foot in the door. My youngest brother and I particularly grew up very close because we were the closest in age. I mean, my oldest brother left for college when I was 6. So, but then later in life, the playing field levels out when you're in your 30s and 40s. And so,
Yeah, age becomes less of a factor, right? You're all just adults.
and you have this common time in your life that you grew up together. So lots of inside jokes, lots of fun memories. My parents were very calm and stable parents. And I think by the time they brought me home, they were pretty confident in their parenting. And I credit them with that they were I felt very safe growing up.
That's amazing. I'm curious. I'm glad you said that. They had 4 different times that they could try out this parenting thing. They did it on 4 boys. Did you get the sense growing up that they were like really good at raising boys, but had never done the girl thing before? I think you're missing something here, or were they're just great parents?
I mean, I gave them a run for their money for sure. The sad thing is, looking back now, there's another truth to my upbringing in which that I was sad a lot of the time. I've mentioned in other places, like my mom got a poster full of like cartoon animals and it said, "Smile, it's contagious." And I think because I don't think I smiled very much. When I look back at
Mhm.
pictures of myself as a child, I have this internal sadness. And I think I just always felt like that's who I was and that was my personality. As I grew older, I think I came through that, but there was definitely part of me that felt a little lonely. And perhaps at the time that could have been like, you're so much younger than your siblings and you're the only girl. Going into adolescence, I was like hell on wheels. And I think honestly, My parents might say raising a girl was very challenging, but I also think that they did a lot right to get me through those times. Adoption was not really ever a conversation, though.
Gotcha. So is it that it was not a conversation because no one ever brought it up, so it never got talked about? Or if it ever came up a little bit, it got brushed aside, so it was not a conversation? Because there's a difference.
So, you know how I always say, you know how there's a lot of different layers of communication, right? Behavior, communication, facial expressions. I mean, we would talk about it, but it was a story, a narrative. We adopted you when you were newborn. We brought you home. You're part of this family. And I never really felt any messaging other than that. But I don't know that I always felt like I belonged. And it was confusing to me as a child because there was no conversation around why I might feel that way. And there was messaging sort of like my adoptive mother would say things, she would give my birth mother credit. So if I, for example, had a really good sense of direction and my mother would say, I have a terrible sense of direction, so I can't take all the credit. You must have gotten that from your birth mother.
Uh-huh.
Or your birth mother must have been pretty smart because look how smart you are. And I always appreciated that because that sort of went into my self-esteem bank, right?
Yeah.
That all both parts of me were quote unquote good. But then there were other things, that look of discomfort if I questioned or was curious. It's interesting to me. I don't even think I was really that curious about what she looked like or what her name was. But I do recall as I got a little bit older, there would be times where it was like, you don't want to meet her, do you? Which is a lot different than if you want to meet her, we'll do whatever it takes.
Yeah, it was how would you call what would you call that? It's not an affirmation and not a rejection either. There's a word for it that is escaping me right now, but I know exactly what you're talking about. It's this invitation to not do something, basically, right?
I call it checking the box, right? It's
Oh,
growing up in the 70s and 80s, there were certain things. I think one of the things that was really popular in adoption at that time was you've got to tell the child. And I think that was one of those check the box things, right? We told her before she was 5. And then the other was we brought up reunion. But I have to tell you, working with a lot of adoptive parents, I think people can feel like their actions are maybe less than informed at times, but I also think, like, they don't realize what they're doing. Like, I don't think that I believe that a lot of adoptive parents who say something along the lines of, "You don't wanna meet her, do you?" They really believe that they are offering you the option. You One
right.
thing that my work as a therapist has taught me working with a lot of adoptive families is, like, really getting into that mindset of the adoptive parents and what that has in common, and it's been really helpful for me to gain compassion for the trauma associated with that type of parenting as well, and so I think until they know or are ready to know, a lot of times people aren't aware how they're communicating messaging to you.
I think that's right. I think you're absolutely right. And especially you have a sensitivity to it because you're adopted. Had your one of your parents been adopted, potentially they would have said it a little bit differently, right?
Mhm.
But they've had 4 natural children, and I get the impression that neither of them is adopted, and therefore they aren't sensitive to how it sounds when you offer something like that. Because it's different than saying, "You don't wanna go to University of Maryland, do you?" Right? "Yeah, I do." That's I've got a choice there because I might wanna go to UVA or I might wanna go somewhere else. But the offer of something as sensitive and deep as that, you don't want to reconnect with your biology, do you? Is a very different question that has a whole lot more weight to it that a person wouldn't necessarily be able to think through without that sort of intimate knowledge of having been through the situation. So I see exactly what you're saying. That's wild. Wow.
Nothing breaks my heart more than when I sit face to face with adoptive parents and I have to have the talk with them about adoption as trauma and what's really happened here, and that none of this is really shocking. And they were sold a very different line.
Yeah.
As I think our community and me personally has had the opportunity to really turn on the light and look closely at the industrial complex of adoption and like what is being marketed and what is being promised. By the time their child is 12, 13, 14, it's what is happening. But then the flip side of that is I've had people who work in adoption tell me, we try to tell the parents, but they don't want to hear it. So I'm not really sure where
This is a great point. I'm really glad you said that because I don't know that I've really ever had this discussion before, but it's a really wonderful point. I often will say things like adoption always starts from a challenging place, right? Most of the time. There are those parents out there, sounds like yours, didn't need to have another child, right? They've proven they could do it, but there was love in their heart. They chose to give another child an opportunity, did so. But many of the times, and I think you'll agree, folks adopt out of a need or necessity or desire for to fill a gap. I am what the father or mother is not able to help reproduce. They have they have had a child and lost that child, or there's some tragedy in this adoptive parent space. And then on the other side, there's this piece that is however the child came to be available for adoption. Parents deceased, parents in jail, whatever the unexpected pregnancy that has landed the classic sort of young mother in trouble, or just the straight breakup by the parents who say you're not going to be with that person from the other side of the tracks, whatever it is. So there's always these two divergent tragedies or traumas on each side. And in that conversation you were just talking about this, you've got the therapist or the individual who's in the adoption machine who was trying to inform the parents. This is how you need to go about this. I need you to inform the child early and be open to talking about it often and giving all of this guidance along the way. And the adoptive parent has come into this with this, I don't need to hear any of that. I'm about to have this child and this is going to fix a whole lot of problems for us. We're going to be so happy. And so they've turned the mute button is on for the message that they should be receiving. And so they're not able to hear the importance of what the professional is telling them about being receptive and appropriately communicative and all of these other things. So I'm really glad you brought this up because I do believe some people go into it with this is going to fix us and I'm going to be so much better for this. And so you will turn off some of those other messages because you need it to fix you. And then one more quick point, I always like to hear from people when they say, Yvonne Rivers, birth mother who does Birth Moms Real Talk, says, do the work. You got to get yourself right before you go into reunion. And I believe the same thing is true going into adoption. If you're not able to conceive, you need to get right with that, right? Don't just accept it, but acknowledge it, discuss it, get through it, get therapy for it, and as best as you can, heal yourself from that so that you are in a healed place when you go into adoption. You can't go into adoption to heal. You need to be healed before you enter adoption, in my opinion.
So statistics show that something like 75% of adoptive families adopt after infertility. So it's 3/4 of it.
Wow.
But my experience is when you do a little digging with adoptive families who have not experienced infertility, there's usually other trauma there. I mean, it's an interesting question. Why do some parents turn to adoption and others are like, not for me. I know I'm not down for that. And this is where the research piece, there's such great research happening and hopefully more and more, where we can really start to look underneath into the soil, right, of all of these factors and really understand. Because I listened last night to Beth Steverson's book launch about adoption and suicidality. This is a serious issue, right? Impact. And now with social media and because the world has gotten so much smaller, we're really leaning into the impact of family separation, of adoption for all members.
Yeah, these
Yeah.
are really good points. Wow. Fascinating. So, Amy, you were telling me before that you were hell on wheels as a teenager, and it sounded like you were about to get into something very interesting in terms of a discovery when you were in your middle teenage years. Tell me about this. What was the situation leading up to this discovery of yours?
So I was snooping.
As we do.
If you snoop, be careful. And I found a folder that said Amy adoption. So of course I dove right into it in my all of my 14-year-old splendor. And I saw my birth mother's name for the first time.
Wow.
And I wrote it down and it was 1984. So I went and got the Rockland County phone book. And my birth name is pretty unusual. And so I looked up and there were only like 3 or 4 people listed by that name. And I called one of the numbers, and I now know that I spoke to my biological aunt.
Wow.
Um, and I called and I was looking for my birth mom, and she said, "She's not here, but here's her number." And she said something to the effect of, "I feel like she might be expecting your call or something." I wasn't sure, but I had the phone number and I carried it around in my backpack for like 2 weeks. And I didn't call right away, which I find is really interesting. I feel like intuitively I knew I needed to pause. And that is one thing I really feel like people should take away from this discussion about reunion is I always tell people slow down,
Yeah.
right? Because we get a crumb or we get a DNA result or we get a clue or a tip and we dive in head first and it can be diving into a pool with no water, right? It's just take a minute. And so I think I instinctively needed a couple of weeks to just prepare myself. And then I remember I went to my best friend's house and we sat on the phone together and we called. And I spoke to my birth mother for about maybe 20 minutes. I have to tell you, I was so nervous. I think I completely shut down. But it was a brief conversation. She was happy to hear from me. She had moved on in her life and had 3 small children that she was raising. And she sounded very much at the time at peace with the decision to relinquish and place me. And she said, "I will meet you, but only with your parents' permission." So I was very close with my parents and we had a lot of good communication. So I felt compelled to go home and tell them what I had done. And I walked into the house and I walked into their room and I said, "Guess who I spoke to today?"
Oh my gosh.
I said, "My birth mother." I believe I said her name. And if I tell you, it was like the air got sucked out of the room and I could see the blood with like drained from both of their faces. And they took a minute and then they started with the questions. And you could tell they were like trying to restrain themselves. Like you can tell they were trying to do the right thing. And that feeling of the ground shaking beneath me in my otherwise very secure life, I shut that down.
How do you mean?
I just put it away. I closed that door. I never spoke to her again. I think I threw her number in the garbage.
So you're saying that by you walking in, you haven't even said, I have to tell you something. I found this folder. You just walked in and said, I spoke to this woman and they're totally caught off guard. And you seeing how off guard they were caught, the blood draining from their faces, oxygen sucked out of the room, the ground is shaking, just complete upheaval of your life. What you're saying is, I do not want this feeling. If this outreach is going to bring me that feeling where I am here and comfortable and safe, I do not want that. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes. And even more so, I felt in the weeks following that, I could feel the insecurity of my parents, particularly my adoptive mother. There was lots of "we love you, don't you?" And I mean, my parents told me they loved me probably every single time we hung up the phone. There was a lot. They were very generous with that. But it was palpable. And it really reflecting back, I realized that the fear of abandonment and the fear of loss is not just the adoptive child's burden to carry.
Mhm. Yeah,
I
for
think
sure.
it's so present in the adoptive parents as well, that there's this thing that can come up at any time. But I put that away until I was in social work school in my 20s.
Yes.
And when social work school, there's a lot of sort of self-reflection and they encourage you to work through your own things. And I remember it was at that point that I became curious about what she looks like, my birth mother. And to my adoptive mother's credit, she remembered that a year or so after I was born, there was an engagement announcement in the local newspaper, and she had recalled seeing that it was my birth mother, and she said, "I clipped it out for you at the time, and I was gonna give it to you one day, but I've misplaced it, or I don't know, maybe I chickened out." So, she went every day on her lunch break to the library, and you might recall there used to be a thing called the microfiche.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. She sat and scrolled through a year's worth of newspapers until she found this photo of my birth mom in the newspaper.
Mhm.
The time that she was in the newspaper, she was 20 when she had me, so she must have been like 22. So she was the age I was now when my mother gave me the picture.
At that time. Wow. Oh, that's so fascinating.
And I just remember she gave it to me in a manila envelope, and she said, "Here, I'll let you do with this what you will." And she left. I was living in New York City at the time, and I sat down on the sidewalk on 12th Street, and I opened up this envelope and pulled out this photocopy, and it was like I was looking at myself.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That's unbelievable. But how cool of your mother to spend that time to invest in reconnecting you to something that she had seen, but for whatever reason hadn't connected you to. And it sounds like regretted it a bit and said, you know what, I need to make this right, and really invested in it. A lot of parents don't, a lot of people won't do that. Great parents do that kind of stuff. You know this. That's
Yeah.
really cool that she did that. Can I just ask you, have you been past that space on 12th Street and said, that's where I sat right there. I
Yep.
remember that moment.
It
That's
was right
incredible.
outside of a secondhand record store that was beneath my apartment, and yeah, I mean, I can transport myself. I can feel those feelings anytime I can go back to that. And I fell down a little bit after that. I remember I was really going through intense grief. I remember feeling like this free fall feeling. I was going back, and in my body, I felt like this experience of the day I was born, and then the 48 hours later that my parents were able to bring me home, and feeling like those 2 days of my life were some sort of free fall. And I think my adoptive mother was very confused at the time, like, why was this coming up so intensely? But I just remember there were times where I wanted to, like, 22-year-old me wanted to crawl into my mother's lap and just sob like a little kid. Like, it really felt like I was going through this intense primal grief.
Wow.
And then I graduated school, and once again, I packed it up. I kept it where it was, and I boxed it up. My therapist at the time wasn't really, I mean, they might have been trying to get into my adoption, but I don't think I was ready.
Interesting. This is an interesting repetitive theme of yours, to take in the big moment, soak it up, feel the feels and how deep they go. And then you go, let me bundle that up and put it over here. And then you keep moving on. Is that a repetitive theme in other areas of your life, or is it just about this adoption sort of exploration experience?
I think that there was part of me that sensed that if I went far enough afield into this adoption discovery, there would be no coming back from it. And ultimately, the truth is, when I did finally keep going and never looked back, it, it did change everything.
Good.
Ultimately, I really have to tell you, I I honestly don't think I had a choice.
I'm going to be interested to hear this piece. But I've heard folks say before that there is the person you are before adoption reunion, and then there's the person after. And you can't go back to the person you were, whatever your experience is. It's finding a grave or an amazing reunion or something completely awful. You just cannot go back to who you were previously because of the sort of breadcrumbs you followed. And I want to say I loved a couple of analogies you made. You created some images of diving into a pool with no water, right? You talked about this search being following breadcrumbs. And the immediate thing that I thought about was, as you're looking down and you're picking up a breadcrumb, a couple of feet in front of you is another one. And you just keep looking down and you keep grabbing another and another. And next thing, you've gotten so far down the path, you haven't picked your head up and looked around to see, like, where have I come? Where am I now? Right. And that's, I think, the pause that you were talking about before. Let me pick up this breadcrumb and then look around and see what's the environment I'm in now.
let me pick up another one, as opposed to what we typically do, which is very eagerly tread down the path of picking up crumb after crumb, trying to collect them as quickly as possible because we want to see what's at the end of the trail without looking around to see, like, how are my adoptive family feeling about this? And what are my own feelings, et cetera, et cetera. So I loved that breadcrumb analogy.
Right. What do I need right now?
Mm.
Rather than, do you feel, Damon, like sometimes this rush toward reunion or rush into reunion comes from a feeling of if you lost $1 million on a bus and you got it back, right? Now you're going to really protect that $1 million even more so. You're going to wear it on a money belt everywhere you go, right? I feel like because of there's this loss and separation, many people I work with are like afraid of losing it again. And so they're holding on to it. Like they're trying to get after it so quickly. And I understand that drive. I mean, I know you talk to so many people on here about reunion.
Yeah, it's funny. My mind just always focuses on the analogies, and I feel like it's a little bit of the opposite, where you've never had the million. You've never had it,
Yeah.
but it's been out there. It's lingering in your mind that it's probably attainable. And then you start getting this accumulation of doubling your money over time. And you're starting to feel like, man, I think that million really is out there. And then you start to rush toward it. So it's less that you had it and lost it, especially in adoption. I feel like it's you know that it's out there and you start to put pressure on yourself to chase it, to get it.
Right.
And, and not unlike the money analogy, for some people, it can make your life amazing. And for others, you can be just as miserable, just rich. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's how the adoption reunion thing is. You can actually attain the goal and be completely fulfilled, or you could end up still feeling totally empty. And I think that goes back to what we talked about before, the healing and self mastery that you have to do before you go after the million, before you go after the adoption reunion, because the person you are at the start and along the journey is who you're going to be at the end. It's not going to change you. It's up to you to change into whom you want to be when you reach that goal, in my opinion.
In her 20s, Amy had put away her adoption curiosity and interests. She graduated social work school and had taken a job in New York City as a social worker when suddenly her adoptive mother told her that she had received a phone call from a stranger who identified themselves as a friend of her birth mother's. The woman was looking for Amy and provided Amy's adoptive mother with the birth mother's address so Amy could write her a letter.
When my adoptive mother called me and told me that my birth mother was looking for me, at that point, I was really angry. My first reaction was just like, it felt intrusive. Here I was, like, finding myself as a young working person, I'm dating and imagining like my adult future self. And it just felt like she came crashing in. So she had written me a letter and I had written her 2 letters back. One that I sent her and one that I still have to this day, but would never send to any other human being because it was filled with so much rage.
Wow.
But I needed to get that out onto paper.
Yeah.
At that point, I think that my feeling was that she had abandoned me and that now she was coming back, and I think there was some messaging, societal and maybe from my family, that she might want something, that there would be a threat to letting this person into my life, right?
Mhm.
She's going to ask you for things or
Some intrusion is coming. Yeah.
right, or that she may want financial things, or we hear a lot in adoption like, "Oh, well, it's a Pandora's box," like reunion is a Pandora's box, and a lot of times we hear that Pandora's box messaging from people who are not adopted, right? "Oh, if there's no closing that box once you open it." So, I had written her back a letter basically asking about her pregnancy with me, my medical history, and if she would tell me about my biological father. And she wrote me back, and I wasn't really satisfied with her answers. I didn't feel like she had answered specifically the questions that I had asked. And so I didn't respond. again. And that was years. So I was 25 at that point, and I really put it away for decades. And it wasn't until, which is not an uncommon thing. So my adoptive father died suddenly in 2017. There was no prolonged illness. Like he went and I mean, there were probably underlying things, but I was out of town and he died suddenly. And it was after that somebody on a DNA site, a cousin on my biological father's side, reached out to me. All of a sudden, after grieving my father, I had the opportunity to find out who my biological father was. And I hadn't really been looking, Demon. I had a friend who asked me to do DNA with her, and she was fascinated, like, with my background, like where I came from. And so she brought me a DNA test and she said, "We'll do it together." And I did not get any results, but I was then in the database. And so a
So
cousin,
yours just sat out there for a while and then
yeah.
suddenly there was a hit. Oh, that's
Mhm.
fascinating.
And that was really when the train just left the station and I was on it. And quite frankly, I was really ready because the way that I believe adoption has impacted me negatively the most was that I was really struggling in intimate relationships. So I had this really successful private practice. I had a million friends. I was an integral part of my adoptive family and felt very close to them. But I got divorced at a very young age with small children, and I was single for most of my adult life. And I was so frustrated, and I just think, like, all the therapy I'd been doing to figure that out and all the work I was doing with adolescent adoptees in my practice all came together, and at that point, things sped up really quickly. So I met my biological father. I finally met my birth mother in person in 2021, and
So let's go back for a quick second. So
okay.
how did your cousin, let me pause you for a quick second because I had a couple of questions in a prior part of what you were talking about. One of the things that you said was that at the time of your birth mother's reemergence, it felt like an intrusion for you. And I couldn't help thinking to myself, yeah, I bet the same was true for her when you were 14. And I
Mhm.
just wondered if you had weighed that juxtaposition of, I did this to her, but now she's doing it to me. Yuck, she's doing it to me. But truthfully, I did the same thing. Did you think about that much?
Right or wrong, I think I had always felt like as the child in the equation that it was my right to search. And at the time when I was younger, I think my feeling was she gave up her rights and that was her choice. And as I mentioned earlier, being completely immersed in every way possible in the adoption space now and really having a chance to look at the system,
Yeah.
I understand that there are a lot of other factors beyond separation between a birth mother and a child, and that often there are is not choice and there is not consent. And there are a lot of factors at play that result in family separation. And a big part of that was leaning into conversations with birth mothers and hearing what they had gone through and hearing how they felt about it and that they did not just ride off into the sunset with a second chance.
Yeah.
So, what I did consider later in life was that she had written me that letter and I just didn't write her back. And I always felt badly that I had just left her in the dark. I mean, I was 25, but still, I felt badly about that as the
Yeah.
years went on.
So one quick question I'd love to ask you. You said, I have a letter that was filled with rage that you keep to this day. Why do you hold on to it? I'm just curious. Why not let it go?
So, it's part of my narrative, it's part of my story. I'm gonna tell you why. So, when I was a child and an adolescent, I would write journals. I've always loved writing. And so but I would tend to write when I wasn't happy. So my journal would be filled with the lowlights. And then when I would go back to writing, like maybe a few months later, I would see the pain I had written about and I would rip those pages out of the journal in an effort to make them disappear. And one thing that I personally feel like is really important with this journey into awareness or consciousness of being an adoptee is really integrating all the truths into your fabric. And so I keep that letter not because I hold on to the anger, because I have no anger anymore towards my birth mother, but because it's a chapter. It's a chapter in the story and it's
Right.
real. And I think you mentioned earlier, Damon, the before a reunion and after reunion or before finding out information. The after person for me is steeped in authenticity. I no longer run from the chapters that were painful. I embrace it all because that's how I've created this person who I am now, which is the real me.
Amy and her birth mother connected on Facebook, so they were in that gray space of being linked, but not connected. They could peer into one another's lives, but they weren't talking. In the meantime, Amy connected with her biological father, who was already terminally ill at the time of their reunion. He was in her life for 2 years before he passed away. I asked Amy what it was like going into reunion with the man, but she took me back for a moment because she needed to share something interesting that had happened.
Actually, going back, I have to say, it was then that I reached out to my birth mother and I said, I know what family, like I know the family, but he's one of many brothers. And I would really like for you to tell me what his name was because I'm going to find out anyway. And I would really like to hear it from you. And so she told me his name. And then we spoke on the phone a few times and then we set up a meeting. And I just remember going to meet him was like an out of body experience. People talk about like watching from above, watching themselves. Like it really just felt like surreal.
This isn't really me. This isn't my life.
But the truth is, when I found him, it was like looking at, again, it was like looking at myself. Not only that, you'll appreciate this as a father. It was also looking at my son.
Really? Oh, wow. This I
My
hear a lot of
my
adoptees will
biological
tell you.
daughter. Yep, I have his eyes, my son has his eyes, and
Yeah.
my son looks like me, and we both look like him, and I think it's like one of those things where, like, when I was younger, I looked maybe more like her, but there was a very strong genetic component, and we talk about mirroring, and I have to tell you, in the family I grew up with, people would never have questioned that I didn't belong there. I looked like I could fit in, but then looking at this man and his hands are my hands and his eyes are my eyes, and it changes you.
It does. It's so crazy. It's so wild. I've had multiple adoptees and I've experienced this thing where your child looks like your birth parent. And it's wild how much they look alike. My son looks so much like my birth mother. It's incredible. And I see myself in my birth father. So I'm sensitive to both pieces that you're talking about here. It's really unbelievable. Wow.
And I never knew. See, it's like you can't know you're missing something that you don't know exists. So for me, in that moment, it was like I was getting something that a part of me always craved, but I couldn't name it. I didn't know. And yet you are meeting this person for the first time at 48.
Yeah. Unreal.
So that was definitely, I mean, my husband and I went up to New Hampshire and stayed at his house. I mean, we were in it. We were in reunion for sure. And I feel like that ended relatively well. We saw each other periodically and we spoke sometimes. And I was really happy I got to know him. And then I'm on his Zoom funeral because it was during COVID. And then I'm on his Zoom funeral and it ends. And I pick up my phone and I have an email from a cousin on my biological mother's side. Apparently, she had just found out about me at a family wedding or something. It came up that my birth mom had surrendered a child or placed a child. And so now it's one chapter was not closing, but coming to an end. And then this cousin on my birth mom's side facilitated an in-person reunion between me and my birth mother.
How was it going into that?
I mean, I have to say it happened and all of this happened while I was had decided to go back to school to work on research around adoption. So I was like in it. It was, I mean, I'll give you an example. And as an adoptee, you probably will get this. So when I met my birth mom, I met my half sister at the same time. And we were playing that game, like, what are you into, to see if we had like any coincidences. And I was like, what are your favorite colors? And she's orange and purple. And if I tell you, Damon, my whole life, if you asked me what my favorite colors were, not, I wouldn't have said orange or purple. I would have said orange and purple. Like,
Really?
yes, and yes, could it be a complete coincidence? It could be. Do I choose to make it not one? Yes, because,
Yeah.
like, it
I'm
should be
not seeing orange and purple.
right,
It's
like,
the
more than like,
and purple.
it makes you feel real in a
Yeah.
way that you never knew you didn't feel real.
Yeah. How was it to be face to face with your birth mother?
We were both so nervous. I did a good meditation before I met her, and then we just basically hugged and cried for a really long time.
Really? Wow. That must have been so just healing and cathartic, right? To finally be over it. You've written the rage letter, you've not responded, and all these other things. And now you're just face to face and you can just be yourselves.
This is an argument for slowing down because had I met her at any other point along my path, I don't know that I would have ever been as ready as that day that I met her. And one of the biggest things that happened, besides working through a lot of my stuff, was I faced birth mothers in general who were willing to advocate for other birth mothers to tell their stories, women who had stepped out of the shadows, right? And it was in those conversations that it softened my anger, it gave me compassion. And so by the time I met my birth mom, I really felt a lot of things for her, but anger was not one of them. What she did was both really brave and also she survived.
As one has to after that level of adversity, right? One step, one foot in front of the other to march on with your life in the best way you can possibly do it. So that's really good that you got that healing out of meeting her, finding him, all of this stuff. That's amazing.
One of my goals for getting Dr. Geller on the show was to help her share more about the therapy practice she launched in 2001 and her excellent new online resource for adoptees and people who support us called adultadoptees.com. In your browser, make sure you hyphenate adult and adoptees. It's adult-adoptees.com. Amy explains how her work has unfolded over time.
I was very interested in working with teenagers because I wanted to be the therapist I needed when I was a teenager.
Mhm.
And the teenagers that were coming to me, many of them happened to be adopted. And I say happened to be because often the parents would call and they would give me all the reasons they wanted their child to come to therapy. And right before we'd hang up at the end, they'd say, and I don't know if it matters, but they happen to be adopted. Fast forward, as an adoptee myself, I was really frustrated with the lack of understanding for this population, for young adoptees, many of whom were going through a lot of similar sort of trauma responses. And we were focusing a lot on their behaviors instead of their feelings and their experiences. And so that propelled me to go back to school and get a doctorate because I was looking for theory, I was looking for research, and I really wasn't satisfied. At the time, I felt like a lot of what I was reading was not by us, right? I felt like a lot of what I was reading was written from outsiders or from adoptive parents, and it just wasn't landing well with me. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to go back to school because I want to get adoptive voices in the research. At first, I was thinking my voice, but then the program that I went to offered me the opportunity to do qualitative research. And so I engaged in a study where I interviewed 15 diverse adoptees from across the country about their experiences in therapy. And I expected to find that adoptees were disappointed, that therapists who lacked training in adoption were causing harm. And I was actually very happy to talk to many adoptees who said, you know what? My therapist didn't really know much about adoption. She's not part of the community, but here's what she did or he did right. And this was great news because what this told me was, hey, yes, we want to move towards competency in adoption, right? We want therapists to get more training. They get almost none in graduate programs now. But what people were telling me was my therapist believed me, they listened, and they made it their business to learn. And so one of the cool things about the Rutgers Doctors of Social Work program is that the third year they have you do a website. And I loved the idea because I wanted to take what I learned from my research and do something forward facing for the community as opposed to backward facing for the academy, right?
Yeah.
Many doctoral programs have you write a dissertation and you file it away and it can become a book or
Yes.
me, I'm so community driven that I loved the idea of making something for us, by us. And so I created a website called adultadoptees.com. And the real title is Therapy with Adult Adoptees, a guide for clinicians. And so in this website, it's really geared towards clinicians who maybe find themselves working with somebody and now either they come as an adoptee or they start emerging into awareness like later in the process. But the truth is, any therapist isn't going to know everything about everything.
Yeah.
So I wanted to say, hey, it's okay that you haven't gotten this training, but I'd like to give you this resource, at least to get you started, to get you on. And then I also thought about the times that I was in therapy and didn't feel like my therapist really got the adoption piece and how cool it would have been to have a website to say, here, many adoptees in my study talked about resenting or being exhausted from having to teach their therapists.
Mhm.
And I think that happens in a lot of marginalized communities where like the burden then becomes for them to teach or be the token voice of. And so I wanted to be like, here, I have this for you, but then you're going to take it and you're going to do the work. And I'm
Provide the framework.
right.
You now take it forward, put the meat on it, and make it part of your practice, right? Let's make
Yeah.
this meaningful for the adoptees you are in service to. I love that. That's amazing.
And I want to say to therapists, hey, it's cool that you don't know, but you're going to work with an adoptee. You are going to have adoptees in your practice. Just it's a guarantee. We are overrepresented in mental health. And there are staggering numbers of us. And particularly like now, the baby scoop era adoptees, of which, you and I probably are, we're all in middle age. And
Yeah.
another thing that the research is supporting is that middle age is a very important time in the lifespan of the adoptee, that it is often when we come out of the fog, if that's terminology that you're comfortable with, or come into awareness/consciousness. So middle age is an important time. So I wanted a website that focused on us adoptees as adults. And you can really take it like when you first open the website, right out of the gate, it's like 25 things not to say to an adoptee.
Mhm.
And as I was doing this and the people in my cohort were looking at it, many of them came up to me and said, gee, I've done those things.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize.
That's great.
Right. And then later it gets into sort of some more clinical considerations and there's lots of build outs to research and resources. So yeah, I'm really excited about it. I feel like it's something I'm really proud of contributing to the community.
You should be. It's really wonderful. I was so glad that you reached out to see how I could be a contributor. And I'm glad that we got to interview for your project. Now you've been interviewed for my project. The website again is adult-adoptees.com. We'll make sure that it goes out over social media and in the links and all that other stuff. Dr. Amy Geller, this has been absolutely amazing. It was really good to see you again. Thanks so much. And let me ask you one more quick thing. Was it you that started Adoptee Voices on Peloton?
Yes.
There we go. So anybody out there who's listening, if you're riding Peloton, exercising Peloton, whatever, this is your girl right here. Dr. Amy Geller started the
Thank you.
hashtag-
David Flyer on Peloton every day. Come join us.
There
Come
you
join our
go.
Hashtag.
Adoptee Voices. Look for us on Peloton. Take care, Amy. It was great to see you, okay?
Thanks, Damon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Amy had a great life as the youngest of 5, but she admitted she was sad a lot as a child. I found it fascinating to hear her recount of reaching out to her birth mother at 14 years old. pausing before calling the woman, then approaching her adoptive parents to tell them whom she had spoken with by phone. Seeing the parents she loved so much be so shaken by her unexpected outreach to her birth mother was enough to make Amy not want that discomfort inserted into her adopted life. I was glad to hear that Amy wrote that angry letter but didn't send it. This was another moment of pause and caution for her. She stopped to feel the feels, document that chapter of her life, extract the venom she was brewing inside out of her and onto the page, and never send it forward to poison the relationship with her first mother. Incredibly, Amy was fortunate to have met her birth father before his passing, allowing her to have the experience of seeing how alike they were in real life, not just in photos or as recounted by others. Dr. Amy Geller is the wonderful mind behind adultadoptees.com. Remember to add the hyphen in the middle as you check out and share the information and resources she has curated on the site. Again, it's adult-adoptees.com. And when you're there, be on the lookout. You might see someone you know contributing his opinion to the platform. I'm Damon Davis, and I hope you found something in Amy's journey that inspired you, validates your feelings about wanting to search, or motivates you to have the strength along your journey to learn. Who am I really?